Valentina Obuhova stood in the middle of the room, holding a photograph in her hands. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold. July 1954 had been unusually stuffy in Serpukhov near Moscow. They trembled from the realization that her whole life for the last 9 years could have been a lie. She had found this photograph by chance. Petrov had asked her to bring him his old greatcoat from the attic. He intended to modify it into a winter coat for Alexei. When Valentina took the greatcoat off the hook, the photograph fell out of the torn lining of the pocket. A black and white military group of soldiers against the backdrop of a destroyed building. She immediately recognized Mihail. Second from the left, smiling with the same smile she had remembered all these years. Next to him stood other fighters, tired but happy, victorious. Valentina turned the photograph over. On the back, in ink, was written, May 45, Berlin, the war is over. In memory of friend Pasha from Mihail O. The world wavered. May 45, Berlin. But Mihail, her first husband, had died in April 45, near Kustrin. That's what Petrov, his friend from the front, who later became her second husband, had told her. How could a dead man be photographed in Berlin over a month after his death? She raised her eyes and saw Petrov in the doorway. His face was whiter than lime. He wasn't looking at her, but at the photograph in her hands. And in that gaze, there was something that made Valentina freeze inside. It was the look of a hunted animal. No, worse. It was the look of a man whose carefully constructed lie was about to collapse, burying everyone nearby under the rubble. According to the testimonies of the neighbors, who later testified, not a sound was heard from the Obuhov-Petrov house that day. A strange, unnatural silence, as if the very air in the house had frozen in anticipation. And it had all begun 9 years ago, in 45. In the May of the victorious year, when the whole country was celebrating, and Valentina had just learned to live with the thought that she would never see Mihail again. Petrov had appeared on her doorstep in Serpukhov 2 weeks after the victory. Tall, weakened, in a faded uniform with 2 Red Star orders. In his hands, he held a military sack. Valentina Ivanovna. I am Grigory Petrov. I served with your husband in the same unit. I promised him, if anything. His voice trembled. From Valentina's memories, which she later recounted to investigators, she believed him unconditionally at that moment. Perhaps because she very much wanted to believe that someone had been with Mihail in his final moments. Petrov recounted in detail, with all the particulars that only an eyewitness could know, how their unit had forced the Oder in April 45, how the Germans had opened a devastating fire, how Mihail had covered the comrade's retreat and had been directly hit by a mortar shell. He died like a hero, Valentina Ivanovna. Instantly, he didn't suffer. I buried him myself near Kustrin, in a mass grave. I noted the coordinates. After the war, they will put up an obelisk. Petrov spoke, and Valentina cried, her face hidden in his shoulder. Alexei, 3 years old, Mihail's son, watched from behind the stove, not understanding why his mother was crying and a strange uncle was hugging her. But now, holding the photograph from Berlin, dated May 45, Valentina understood. It had all been a lie. A monstrous, well-thought-out lie. Mihail had reached Berlin. He was alive in May. What had happened then? And who in fact was this man who had slept in her bed for 9 years? Historians who studied the documents of that period note an interesting detail. In May 45, tens of thousands of soldiers were returning home with similar stories. They brought news about fallen comrades to their families. It was an unwritten law of the front. If you survived, find the family of the fallen friend, tell them, help. But usually, such messengers came, fulfilled their duty, and left. Petrov stayed. The first months, Petrov just helped. He would come in the morning, chop wood, repair the leaky roof of the shed, and look after little Alexei. The neighbor, Marfa Stepanovna Kryuchikova, later recalled, I would sometimes look out the window, and he would be playing with the little boy in the garden, teaching him how to plant apple saplings correctly. Alexei followed him around like a shadow. Uncle Grigory, yes. Uncle Grigory. And Valentina was still mourning her husband. She had lost all her weight, turned dark. Petrov would bring her food. She wouldn't eat. He would force her, saying, "You must live for your son." Mihail would have wanted that. According to the documents from the military commissariat, Petrov officially demobilized in August 1945. Oddity number 1, which Valentina would only notice years later. Why was he demobilized so quickly? The war had ended in May, and most soldiers were returning home towards the end of 45, beginning of 46. Petrov had a wound mentioned in his documents, a contusion, but he moved with ease. Only sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, he would limp on his left leg, then forget and walk normally again. In the autumn of 45, the first oddity occurred. Valentina received a letter from Mihail. Yes, exactly that. A letter from her dead husband. It was dated March 45. It seemed it had traveled a long time through all the military transit stations. Mihail wrote about an important matter he had to finish after the war. He wrote vaguely, with allusions. "If something happens to me, remember, I did everything for the sake of the truth. There are people who hide their true faces. After the war, they will try to lose themselves among honest people. But I know the truth about—" Further on, a line was covered with censor's ink. Valentina showed the letter to Petrov. He read it, frowned. Mihail was sometimes too suspicious. The war, you know, affects everyone differently. Some become tougher, others start seeing enemies everywhere. Don't trouble yourself, Valentina Ivanovna. He took the letter, said he would take it to the military commissariat. Maybe they would be interested in what Mihail wrote. Valentina never saw the letter again. In the winter of 46, Petrov proposed to her. Not romantically, without flowers and a ring. He simply said at dinner, "Valentina Ivanovna, Alexei needs a father. You need support. I have grown attached to you both. Let's get married. I will be a good husband and a good father, I promise." Valentina refused. The wound was still too fresh, the memory of Mihail too strong. Petrov nodded, accepted the refusal calmly, but did not leave. He continued to come, to help, to care. Contemporaries noted that Petrov was surprisingly patient. Another man would have gotten angry, found someone else. After the war, men were in high demand, but this one waited, methodically, day by day, becoming indispensable. By the spring of 46, Valentina already couldn't imagine how she would have managed without him. Alexei called him Daddy. Petrov would correct him. "I am Uncle Grigory. Your father was a hero." But the boy stubbornly repeated, "Daddy Grigory." In May 46, exactly 1 year after Petrov's return, Valentina said yes. The wedding was modest. A few neighbors, a table with simple dishes, samahonka instead of champagne. They didn't take photographs. They weren't in the mood for it. The only thing that remained from that day was the entry in the civil registry. The marriage was registered between citizen Petrov Grigory Nikolaevich, born in the year 1918, originating from the Saratov region, and citizen Obuhova Valentina Ivanovna, born in the year 1920, originating from the city of Serpukhov, Moscow region. Everything decent, everything correct, except that in the Saratov region, as would be discovered many years later, there was no Grigory Petrov listed as born in the year 1918. But that was later. For now, the wedding had passed. If you can call a modest table for 10 people that, and life entered a new track. The neighbors, at first, looked askance. How could it be? Not even a year had passed since the news of her husband's death, and she was already marrying another. But it was a special, post-war period, a time when survival was more important than conveniences. And for a single woman with a child, it was almost impossible to survive. Maria Fyodorovna Sicheva, who worked at the Serpukhov city council at the time, later told investigators an interesting detail. Widows with children constantly came to us, asking for help, work, any kind of support. The state helped, of course, but it was barely enough for bread. And here, Valentina got lucky. A man was found who took on the care for her and for another's child. We even envied her a little. Petrov had indeed become an exemplary husband and stepfather. He got a job at the Krasny Textilshik factory as a section foreman, a specialty which, according to him, he had learned even before the war. Decent salary, ration card from the factory. The house was transformed. New furniture appeared. Petrov proved to be a jack of all trades. He himself crafted a table, benches, even a small wardrobe for Valentina's dresses. Alexei received a wooden horse, masterfully carved from a single piece of wood. The boy wouldn't leave his stepfather's side, but there were oddities, small, almost imperceptible, which Valentina initially attributed to war habits. Petrov would startle at any loud knock on the door. He might jump up in the middle of the night, grabbing a non-existent weapon. Once, in the autumn of '46, the local policeman, militiaman, knocked on their door. A simple check of documents, a routine. Petrov opened the door, and Valentina saw for the first time an expression of animalistic fear on his face. It lasted a moment. Then he recovered, smiled, invited the militiaman into the house. The documents were in order. The local policeman left satisfied, even drank a small glass of samahonka for the health of the young family. But Valentina memorized that look. In the winter of '47, the first serious incident happened. Petrov came home late from the factory, drunk. Not that it was anything out of the ordinary. Men, after their shift, often stopped by the tavern near the factory. But that evening he wasn't just drunk, he was in a strange state. He sat at the table, stared fixedly at one point, and suddenly began to speak in German. Valentina didn't know German, but she recognized the language. During the war, she had heard enough of it from the prisoners who were marched through Serpukhov. Petrov spoke clearly, as if giving a report. Then he fell silent, looked at Valentina with a completely sober gaze, and asked, "Did I say something?" She replied no. He was just sitting quietly. He nodded and went to bed. The next day, Valentina cautiously asked him where he knew German from. Petrov wasn't shy. It was useful on the front. Someone had to interrogate the prisoners, so I learned out of necessity. The explanation sounded logical. Many soldiers from the front knew a few phrases in German, but what Petrov had said that night were not separate phrases. It was a long, coherent speech. As the investigation would later establish, analyzing Valentina's testimonies, Petrov, in his drunken delirium, was uttering a text very similar to a standard German intelligence report. In the spring of '47, Valentina became pregnant. Petrov was happy, carried her in his arms, forbade her from doing heavy work around the house, and even hired a neighborhood girl to help with the chores. It seemed that life had finally settled down, but it was precisely then that the nightmares began. Petrov screamed in his sleep, not every night, but regularly. He shouted names. "Müller, Heinz, don't shoot! I'm one of yours!" And once, this Valentina remembered particularly clearly, he shouted, "Mihail, no! I didn't want to, it was an order!" She would shake him, wake him up. Petrov would come to his senses, look at her with an absent gaze, then focus. What? What happened? She would tell him about the screams, the names. He would wave his hand. "I'm dreaming about the war. Everyone from the front has this. It will pass." But it didn't pass. It only got worse. Towards the end of '47, Petrov hardly slept, staying up at night in the kitchen, smoking. Valentina went out to him once, saw a photograph on the table. A group photo of soldiers. Petrov quickly hid the photograph, but Valentina managed to notice. The face of one of the soldiers was carefully scribbled out with ink. In December '47, their daughter was born. They named her Nina. Petrov was tender with the little one, but Valentina noticed that he was afraid to be left alone with the children. He didn't trust himself. Once, she returned from the store earlier than usual and caught a strange scene. Petrov was standing over Nina's cradle with a pillow in his hands, just standing and looking. Seeing Valentina, he startled, put the pillow back. I wanted to cover her better. It got cold. But it was summer. July '48, and it was warm in the house. The years '48 and '49 passed in a strange tension. On the outside, everything was fine. Petrov received a promotion at the factory, became a shift manager. Alexei went to school, proved to be a capable student. Nina was growing into a healthy little girl. The neighbors had stopped whispering, accepting Obuhova's new family as an accomplished fact. But inside this well-being, Something dark and frightening was brewing. Petrov's nightmares intensified. Now he screamed almost every night, the names of German officers mixed with Russian ones. "Comrade Major, I have completed the mission," he shouted once, and a minute later, "Herr Sturmbannführer, the data has been transmitted." Valentina began to write down his nocturnal screams in a notebook, which she hid in the shed under the floor. Why she was writing, even she didn't understand. She simply felt that one day this might be important. In the autumn of '48, an incident occurred that made Valentina think seriously for the first time about her husband's past. Mihail's first cousin from Tula, Simeon Obuhov, came to visit. A big, loud, cheerful man, he brought gifts for the children and homemade samahonka. They sat at the table, drank to Mihail's memory, and then Simeon says, "But I saw Mihail in '46 in Moscow at the station. I called out to him, but it was like he didn't hear. He just ran off. I thought maybe I was mistaken, but no, it was definitely him. You can't mistake a mole on the neck like that." Petrov turned pale, but quickly recovered. "You were mistaken, Simeon. Mihail died in April '45. I buried him myself." Simeon shook his head. "Maybe I was mistaken. The war mutilated everyone. Many similar faces appeared, from the wounded, from the maimed." But he looked at Petrov strangely, searchingly. He didn't speak again about the encounter in Moscow, but the atmosphere at the table became tense. That night, Simeon was found dead in the shed. The doctor determined a heart attack. The man was portly, he had been drinking, his heart couldn't take it. Everything logical, everything natural. But Valentina saw how Petrov removed an empty vial of some drops from the shed. They were heart drops, he explained. It seems Simeon felt unwell, wanted to take them, but didn't manage. Except Valentina remembered exactly. They didn't keep any drops in the shed, and Simeon, as far as she knew, did not suffer from heart problems. After Simeon's death, Petrov changed, became even more nervous, suspicious, made a habit of checking all the locks at night, looking under the beds, inspecting the shed. Once, Valentina caught him rummaging through her things. "I'm looking for a needle," he explained. But in his hands, he held that very notebook where she wrote down his nocturnal screams. Fortunately, she had managed to tear out and burn the written pages the day before, leaving only the clean ones. Petrov flipped through the notebook, put it back, but Valentina understood. He suspected something. In the winter of '49, Petrov brought home a photograph, the same one he had hidden before, placed it on the table in front of Valentina. "This is our unit. The year '44, before the offensive." He pointed his finger at himself, young, smiling, then at the face scribbled out with ink. "And this is a traitor. He was giving our men to the Germans. We exposed him and shot him according to the laws of wartime." Valentina asked what the traitor's name was. Petrov fell silent. "It doesn't matter, he's dead. All traitors are dead." In March '49, Valentina found a document in the lining of Petrov's old greatcoat. A pass in the name of Pavel Ignatieff, issued in the year '43. The photograph was of poor quality, but the resemblance to Petrov was discernible. She carefully sewed the lining back, said nothing, but retained the name. Pavel Ignatieff. Who was this? Why was Petrov keeping his documents? Contemporaries remembered that it was precisely in the year '49 in Serpukhov that a wave of verifications of former prisoners of war and those who had been in occupied territory began. They were looking for traitors, collaborators, those who had worked with the Germans. Several people were arrested directly from the Krasny Textilshik factory. Petrov, in those days, was restless, lost weight. His face became drawn. Valentina heard him talking to himself once. "They won't find it. All the documents are destroyed. The witnesses are dead, nobody knows." When she entered the room, he startled, but quickly smiled. "I'm solving a production problem. Complicated, I can't quite get it." The verifications ended towards the summer. Petrov was not touched. His documents were in perfect order. A frontline soldier, decorated, wounded, an honest Soviet man. But Valentina saw how, on the day the last suspect from the factory was arrested, Petrov came home, and for the first time in a long time fell asleep peacefully without screams, without nightmares, as if a weight had been lifted from his heart. The year '50 began with an unexpected visit. On a frosty January morning, when Petrov had already left for the factory, and the children were still sleeping, someone knocked on the door. Not insistently, like the militia or the local authority knocks, but delicately, almost timidly. Valentina opened it. On the threshold stood a man of about 50 years, gray-haired, with deep wrinkles on his face and an empty sleeve tucked into his coat pocket. "Valentina Ivanovna, I am Fyodor Antonovich Kovalyov. I served with your husband, with Mihail." He stumbled over the word husband, as if he didn't know how to correctly name Mihail now that Valentina was married to another. Valentina invited him into the house, poured him some tea. Her hands were shaking. A premonition of something important, frightening, gripped her heart. Kovalyov drank the tea slowly, inspecting the surroundings. His gaze stopped on Petrov's photograph on the dresser. "Is this your new husband?" Valentina nodded. Kovalyov looked at the photograph for a long time, then uttered very quietly, almost in a whisper, "My God, it cannot be." Valentina froze. "Do you know him?" Kovalyov shook his head. "No, it just seemed... He looks like someone. But that one died. Definitely died. I saw it myself." The conversation flowed slowly, as if forced. Kovalyov spoke about the last days of their unit, about how they forced the odor, about how Mihail commanded a squad, and suddenly, as if having decided, he burst out. "Mihail did not die at the forcing. He reached Berlin. I saw him in May 1945, already after the surrender. He was alive and well, preparing to come home to you. He said he had important business to finish, something related to exposing one of our own." Valentina's world collapsed in an instant. If Mihail was alive in May 45, then who had Petrov buried in April? And, most importantly, where was Mihail himself? Kovalyov saw her state, poured her water from the carafe, forced her to drink. "I tried to find him after the war. I wrote inquiries. I was told that Obuhov Mihail Stepanovich is listed as missing without a trace in June 1945. Not dead, mind you, but missing without a trace. I came as soon as I could. I live in Kaluga now, but my conscience wouldn't let me rest. I had to tell you." They talked for another hour. Kovalyov recalled details that only a man who had truly served with Mihail could know. He talked about Mihail's mole on his neck, the same one the late Simeon had mentioned, about the scar on his left hand from a German bullet, about how Mihail liked to play the harmonica in the evening. Valentina cried. All these details were true. This was her Mihail, the living Mihail. At least in May 45. Kovalyov was already preparing to leave when he remembered. "Ah, I almost forgot. Mihail, the last time I saw him, said a strange phrase, that he had found a rat who was working both sides. He said he had proof, but he had to be careful, because the rat is cunning and dangerous. I didn't pay attention then. I thought, the man is tired, all sorts of things pop into his head. But now I think, maybe it's important." Valentina walked Kovalyov to the gate. He turned back. "Be careful, Valentina Ivanovna. I, an old soldier, can sense danger. It is in your house." After Kovalyov's departure, Valentina stood at the window for a long time, watching Kovalyov's silhouette dissolve into the winter fog. And then she saw Petrov. He was standing at the end of the street, clearly watching the departing guest. But he wasn't supposed to return from the factory until the evening. In the evening, Petrov entered the house, as usual, kissed Valentina, played with the children. At dinner, he asked, just casually, "Did someone come by today?" "The neighbor said she saw a man at our gate." Valentina was ready for the question. "Yes. A beggar came in, asking for alms. I gave him bread and sent him away." Petrov nodded, but Valentina saw that he didn't believe her. That night, he screamed in his sleep again. But now, Valentina heard clearly. "Mihail is dead. I killed him, on orders. He is the traitor, not me." The next day, Valentina wrote a letter to Kovalyov in Kaluga, asking him to send any documents about Mihail, any proof that he had been alive after April 45. She sent the letter through a friend, Zenaida, who worked at the post office. She was surprised, but helped. She sent the letter not in Valentina's name, but in her own. The reply came 2 weeks later. Kovalyov sent another photograph. Mihail with a group of soldiers at the Brandenburg Gate, dated late May 45. On the back, written in Mihail's hand, "Victory, home soon," and a certificate from the military commissariat that Obuhov Mihail Stepanovichi is listed as missing without a trace since June 1945. Not dead, mind you, but missing without a trace. But that wasn't the most frightening part. Kovalyov had attached a note to the letter. "Valentina Ivanovna, be extremely careful. I've made inquiries. The man in the photograph in your house looks very much like a certain Pavel Ignatiev, who in the year 43 was parachuted by the Germans behind Soviet lines for espionage activities. Ignatiev was hunted until the end of the war, but they didn't catch him. He is considered dead. But I believe otherwise. Once again, be careful." The year 51 became a turning point in this frightening story. Valentina now lived in constant fear. Every morning, seeing Petrov off to work, she wondered if he would return in the evening. And if he returned, what would happen? She began methodically, piece by piece, to gather information about her husband, or rather, about the man who called himself her husband. Historians who studied the documents of that period note an amazing detail. In the year 51, in the USSR, a new wave of hunting for war criminals and traitors began. Many who had managed to hide immediately after the war, changing documents and biographies, were now being caught because of trivial details. Valentina, without knowing it, began her own investigation at the most opportune moment. The system was already looking for those like Petrov. It just needed to be pointed in the right direction. First, Valentina wrote an inquiry to the military commissariat in the Saratov region, asking to clarify the data on Petrov Grigory Nikolaevich, born in the year 1918. The answer came a month later and was stunning. Petrov Grigory Nikolaevich had indeed existed. Born in 1918 in the village of Malye Kopini, Saratov region. Enlisted in the army in 1938. Died in December 1941 near Moscow. Buried in a mass grave near the village of Kryukovo. So, the man who had been living with her for 6 years had appropriated the documents of a dead soldier. But how? And, most importantly, who was he really? Valentina continued to dig. She wrote an inquiry to the archive of the unit where Mihail had served. She asked to be sent any information about her husband's comrades in arms. She was particularly interested in those who had disappeared without a trace or deserted. She had to wait 3 months for the answer. During this time, several alarming events occurred in the Petrov household. First, Petrov had clearly sensed that Valentina was up to something. He began to follow her. Valentina noticed him in the most unexpected places. Near the post office when she went to send letters, near the library, where she was looking for old wartime newspapers. He always found an explanation for his appearance, but Valentina understood. There were too many coincidences. Second, strange visits began. People came to see Petrov, always late at night, always stealthily. They spoke in the yard in whispers. Valentina tried to eavesdrop, but only deciphered fragments of phrases. "The documents are safe. No one must find out. If anything, we blame the dead." After these visits, Petrov was particularly nervous, snapped at the children, spoke harshly to Valentina. Contemporaries remembered that it was precisely in the year 51, in Serpukhov, that a series of strange deaths occurred. 3 former frontline soldiers died, all from heart attacks. All 3 had served in units that had fought on the same sector of the front as Mihail's unit. Coincidence? Valentina didn't believe in coincidences, especially after learning that the day before their deaths, Petrov had visited each of them, supposedly wanting to organize a veterans' meeting. In July 51, the answer from the archive arrived. The dry lines of military bureaucracy hid a real drama. In Mihail's unit, there had indeed been a man named Pavel Ignatiev, a junior lieutenant, deputy to the regiment's chief of staff for intelligence matters. In March 44, he was sent behind German lines on a reconnaissance mission. In April 44, the Germans announced on the radio that they had captured a Soviet intelligence agent, Ignatiev, and that he had agreed to collaborate. In June 44, Ignatiev returned to the unit, declaring that he had managed to escape. He was checked by a special commission, but they found no evidence of treason. And now, the most interesting part. In May 45, Senior Lieutenant Obuhov Mihail Stepanovici filed a report accusing Ignatiev of treason. He claimed to have proof, documents recovered from the German archive. An investigation was appointed, but in June 45, both Obuhov and Ignatiev disappeared without a trace. Both, on the same day. The case was closed for lack of evidence. Valentina reread the document again and again. The picture that was forming was terrifying. Ignatiev, alias Petrov, was indeed a traitor. Mihail had exposed him. And then Ignatiev had killed Mihail, appropriated the documents of another dead soldier, Petrov, and come to her with the news of her husband's death. But why? Just to hide? The answer came unexpectedly. In August 51, Valentina found another letter in the lining of Mihail's old sheepskin coat, which was kept in the attic. Mihail had written it to her, but hadn't managed to send it. It was dated May 45. Valyusha, if you are reading this letter, it means something has happened to me. I found the traitor in our unit. It is Pavel Ignatiev. I have proof. German documents where he is listed as Agent Felix. But there's something else. Ignatiev knows about a treasure. The Germans, when retreating, hid gold and valuables, looted from the USSR. Ignatiev knows where. The sum is huge. I think he plans to take these valuables after the war. I have hidden copies of the documents. The letter broke off. It seems Mihail had been interrupted, and had hidden the unfinished letter in the lining, intending to finish it later. Later that never came. The year 52 began with a discovery that overturned Valentina's entire perception of the man she had lived with for 7 years. In February, when Petrov left on a delegation to Moscow, for the first time in all their years together he had left the house for more than 1 day, Valentina decided to do what she couldn't do before. She searched the attic. Not the whole house, where Petrov could have noticed the traces of her search, but specifically the attic, where he, according to her observations, had never gone up. He said that after his contusion, he couldn't stand heights. Among the old things left by the former owners of the house, behind a stack of rotting wartime newspapers, she found a small package, wrapped in oilcloth. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped the layers. Inside were letters, but not simple letters. It was Mihail's correspondence with someone he only called friend. The handwriting was unknown, but something about it seemed familiar. And suddenly she realized it was Petrov's handwriting, but modified, more rounded, with a different slant. Professionally modified, but still recognizable in the small details. In the writing of the letter D, in the characteristic loop of the U. The correspondence was dated April-May 1945. A monstrous picture emerged from the letters. Friend was convincing Mihail not to file the report about the treason. He promised to share information about the German depots with valuables. He wrote that the war was over. Why dig up the past? They needed to think about the future, about families. Mihail replied harshly, "Duty is duty. Traitors must be judged." In the last letter from Friend, from the end of May, there was a phrase that gave Valentina goosebumps. "You leave me no choice. We meet where we agreed. Come alone. We will settle this like men." But that wasn't the most frightening part. Attached to the letters was a document. A German document on an Abwehr form. Valentina didn't know German, but she understood some words. Agent Felix, especially valuable. Operation Volga. And a photograph. Poor quality, but recognizable. The man in the picture was younger, clean-shaven, with a different haircut. But it was Petrov, or Ignatiev, or whoever he was. Valentina carefully packed the documents back up, put them in their place. Her brain was working feverishly. Now she had proof, but what to do with it? Go to the militia. What if Petrov's people were there too? The same ones who come to him at night. Right to Moscow? To the MGB, Ministry of State Security? But would the letter arrive? And, most importantly, what would happen to her and the children when Petrov was arrested? Wouldn't he kill them all, sensing he was cornered? Petrov returned from Moscow 3 days later. He brought gifts for the children, perfume for Valentina. He was cheerful, full of life. At dinner, he talked about Moscow, about the new constructions. But Valentina saw that he was hiding something. And she noticed another new detail. Petrov now had a briefcase he hadn't had before. Small, leather, with a complicated lock. He put it in the bedroom under the bed, and thinking Valentina didn't see, checked every evening to see if it was in its place. In March 52, an incident occurred that made Valentina understand that time was running out. The district police officer came to them, a new one, freshly appointed, a young lieutenant with honest, open eyes. He had come to get acquainted with the residents of the sector. Petrov was not at home. The lieutenant, his name was Nikolai Sergeyevich Voronov, was drinking tea, asking about life, about the neighbors. And suddenly he asked, "But where did your husband fight? I'm from the front too. Maybe we crossed paths." Valentina tensed up, but Voronov continued, "It's just that I was from the special department. We were the ones catching traitors. And you know what's interesting? Many after the war appropriated the documents of the dead. Now they live under foreign names. Look, we are looking for these types. Maybe you've heard something unusual, strange." He looked at Valentina intently, as if he knew something or suspected. Valentina was silent. Voronov finished his tea, stood up. "If you remember anything, stop by the station or send a little note. Only, be careful. These people are dangerous. Very dangerous." And already as he was leaving, he let slip. "By the way, big checks are starting in Moscow. They will check all the dubious ones again. Documents, biographies, and connections. So, if you have something to say, it's better now. Later, it might be too late." After Voronov's departure, Valentina stayed in the kitchen for a long time. The decision was forming slowly, agonizingly. She had to save her children, and she had to find out the truth about Mihail. Where he died, how, where he was buried. She had the right to know. In the evening, when Petrov returned from work, she greeted him as usual, gave him food, put the children to bed. And then, when they were alone, she asked him directly, "Grigory, where exactly is Mihail buried? I want to go to the grave, to take a handful of native soil." Petrov tensed. "I told you, near Kustrin. A common grave. There are thousands like him there." Valentina nodded. "And the coordinates?" "You said you wrote them down." Petrov darkened. "I lost them. I lost them during the move. Why this interrogation?" That night, Valentina did not sleep. She listened to Petrov tossing and turning beside her. Then he got up, went out into the yard. She crept to the window, saw him. He was smoking, and something was glinting in his hand. A pistol. Petrov was holding a pistol and looking at the house, as if measuring something or making a decision. March 1953 entered the country's history as the month of great mourning. On March 5th, Stalin died. The entire country froze. People cried in the streets, not understanding what would come next. But for Valentina and Petrov, the leader's death meant something more than a simple change of power. It meant the beginning of great changes, and they both understood that. Petrov, on the day of Stalin's death, came home from work pale, drank 1/2 of a glass of vodka in one gulp, which was not characteristic of him. Usually he controlled himself, drank little. He sat down at the table, stared fixedly at one point. Valentina asked him what would happen now. He looked at her with a strange gaze. Now everything will change. Everything. Many who were hiding will come to the surface, and many who felt safe will run to hide. He spoke as if this concerned him personally. In the following weeks, changes indeed began in the country. Rumors spread about amnesty, about the review of cases, about the rehabilitation of the unjustly convicted, but also about the intensification of the search for war criminals. The new leadership wanted to show its principles, and Petrov felt that. He became even more nervous, suspicious. A few times, Valentina noticed him counting money, a lot of money, more than he could have earned at the factory in 1 year. Once, in April, when Petrov was at work, the neighbor Anna Petrovna came to Valentina, an old woman who lived 2 houses away and knew everything about everyone. She sat down in the kitchen, looked around conspiratorially. "Valyusha, I'll tell you something, but don't give me away. I saw your Grigory at night. He was digging something in the woods behind the cemetery, digging a big hole. I went mushroom picking early in the morning, and he comes from there, all dirty, with a shovel in his hand. He saw me, turned all white. He said he was looking for an old grave of a comrade from the front. But he's lying, Valentina. There are no graves there. The Germans had a depot there during the war. Ours blew everything up afterward. Valentina memorized it. The woods behind the cemetery, the German depot. The pieces of the mosaic were forming a picture. That treasure Mihail had written about. Petrov was preparing for what? An escape. But why now, after so many years? The answer came in May. Valentina accidentally overheard a telephone conversation Petrov was having with someone at the factory. She had come to bring him the lunch he forgot at home. Petrov was speaking softly, but someone was shouting into the receiver. She only made out, "Yes, I understand. The lists have been being made for 2 weeks already, no more. Yes, everything is ready. No, the family doesn't know. The family doesn't know." It meant he was planning to flee alone, to leave her and the children. After 8 years of life together, Valentina felt not insult, but relief. If he flees, she will be free. But an inner voice whispered to her, Petrov is not one to leave witnesses, even if those witnesses are his family. More precisely, the family of the man he killed. And at the end of May of the year 1953, Valentina made a decision. She waited for Petrov to fall asleep, gave him sleeping pills, mixing them into his evening tea, and rummaged through that little suitcase under the bed. She picked the lock with a hairpin. A friend who worked at the hospital during the war had taught her this, where she often had to open the suitcases of the deceased to find documents. The contents of the suitcase made her lose her breath. Money. Lots of money. Rubles and dollars. Even Tsarist gold chervonsy. Documents in 3 different names. Petrov, Ignatiev, and one completely unknown, Krylov Pyotr Semyonovich. All with Petrov's photographs, but different. Somewhere with a mustache, somewhere without, somewhere with glasses, and most importantly, a German passport in the name of Walter Müller, with Petrov's photograph and the date of issue. The year 1943. But that wasn't all. At the bottom of the suitcase lay a photograph, a group picture of some German officers, and among them, Petrov in a German uniform, smiling. On the back, an inscription in German, and the date, December 1943. The Abwehr School in Warsaw. Valentina put everything back carefully, closed the suitcase. Now she knew enough, more than enough. Petrov was not just a traitor, he was a professional German agent, infiltrated or recruited, it didn't matter. What was important was that he had killed her husband, a true Soviet officer, to hide his secret, and now he was preparing to flee. The next morning, after sending Petrov to work and the children to school and kindergarten, Valentina went to the militia, to that Lieutenant Voronov. She carried with her the letters from the hiding place in the attic, wrapped in a headscarf. Not all of them. She was not stupid. Only 2 letters and the photograph of the German document. She hid the rest in the forest, in the hollow of an old oak tree, which she knew well. Voronov listened to her attentively, without interrupting. Then he took the documents, studied them, whistled. This is serious. Very serious. Well done for coming. But now you are in danger. In great danger. He thought. Right. Today, you change nothing. Behave as usual. We will set up surveillance. And most importantly, if he suspects anything, if he suggests you go somewhere, run immediately. Leave everything and run. Clear. Valentina nodded. Voronov walked her to the door. We will catch him. We will definitely catch him. But we need time. 1 day. Maybe 2. Hold on tight. She left the militia station and suddenly saw Petrov. He was standing across the street pretending to examine a shop window. But the militia building was reflected in the glass, and he saw her coming out. Their gazes met across the street. A moment stretched into an eternity. Valentina stood at the militia door, Petrov at the shop window. Between them, the dusty street of provincial Serpukhov and 8 years of lies. In his eyes she saw something that made her blood freeze in her veins. He knew. He knew why she had been to the militia. He knew the game was over. And in this knowledge, there was something liberating. There was no longer a need to pretend. Petrov slowly nodded at her, as if greeting her, and left, not towards the factory, where he should have been at that moment, but home. Valentina stood for another minute, gathering her strength, and started after him. What else could she do? The children were at school and kindergarten. To take them from there meant giving herself away completely. Maybe Petrov still doubted? Maybe she had a chance to play her role to the end? At home, Petrov was sitting at the table, in front of him a bottle of vodka, 2 glasses. He motioned to the chair opposite him. "Sit down, Valentina. We need to talk." His voice was calm, even tired. This was scarier than if he had shouted. Valentina sat down. Petrov poured vodka into both glasses, pushed one towards her. "What are we drinking to? To rest or to health?" Valentina was silent. Petrov smirked. "You're quiet. Correct. What is there to say? You know, I suspected you suspected something since the day Simeon came. You remember Simeon? He was a good man. A pity he had a weak heart." He drank his glass, winced. 8 years, Valentina. 8 years. I thought everything had gone well, that I could start over, become another person, maybe even redeem myself. He fell silent, looking out the window, then continued, and notes appeared in his voice that Valentina had never heard before. Sincerity, pain. "Do you think I'm a monster? Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a man who wanted to survive. Do you know what captivity meant in 42? When you are 24 years old and you are faced with the choice? Death by starvation and beatings or collaboration? I chose life. Do you condemn me?" Contemporaries who studied the phenomenon of collaborationism during the war years mention that the stories of these people are rarely black and white. Behind every betrayal lay a human tragedy, a broken will, the fear of death. But this is not a justification. It is an attempt to understand how ordinary people became the executioners of their own people. Valentina found the strength to speak. And Mihail, he wanted to live too. He had a family, a son. Petrov nodded. Mihail was a hero, a true hero, like I could never become. He exposed me. He found the documents in the German archive when we took a small town in Germany. I thought all the papers had burned, but no. Your husband was meticulous, very meticulous. I offered him a deal, half of the treasure for him. It wasn't just German valuables, Valentina. It was the NKVD's gold, which the Germans had captured in 41 during our retreat. Millions. With that money one could start a new life, somewhere far away. But you're Mihail. Petrov shook his head. He said he would rather die an honest man than live as a traitor. Silence fell in the room. Only the clock ticked on the wall. That wall clock that Petrov had repaired in the first month after the wedding. Valentina asked what had tormented her all these years. "Where is he buried? Where is Mikhail's grave?" Petrov turned to her. In his eyes, something resembling regret shone. "In the forest, behind the old German bunker, 15 kilometers from Kustrin. I buried him deep, put a cross made of branches. It has probably rotted already. I didn't want to kill him, Valentina. I honestly didn't. But he went to the command. If they had arrested me, they wouldn't have shot just me, but everyone who had been at the German spy school. And there were different people there. Some, like me, broken, others specially infiltrated. Are spies. I couldn't give them away. It was a lie. And they both knew it. Or a half-truth, which is even worse. Petrov was only saving himself. But even traitors need self-justification, a version of events in which they are not complete monsters. The second half of the year 1953 became a hunting period. After that conversation in the kitchen, Petrov and Valentina lived like two beasts in the same cage. Each was waiting for the other to make the decisive move. Petrov could not simply disappear. He felt the militia's surveillance. Valentina could not leave with the children. He would not have allowed her. A stalemate, which could not last forever. According to the neighbors' testimonies, a heavy atmosphere reigned in Petrov's house during those months. The children had become nervous, fearful, and Alexei, who had already turned 11, had begun to ask questions about his father, his real father. At these questions, Petrov would darken, walk away. Little Nina clung to her mother, sensing the tension. In August 1953, an episode occurred that almost became fatal. Valentina woke up at night from a strange smell. Gas. In the kitchen, the gas tap was open. She rushed to open the windows, to wake the children. Petrov was sleeping or pretending to sleep in his room. In the morning, he acted surprised. The draft probably put out the flame. We must check the stove. But Valentina had seen. The windows had been closed. All of them, down to the last one. The beginning of the year 1954 was marked by an event that hastened the denouement. In January, a commission from Moscow came to Serpukhov. They were checking the documents of all those who had returned from the front. Special attention to those who had been in captivity or in occupied territory. Petrov received a summons to present himself at the military commissariat for clarification of biographical data. On the night before the visit to the commissariat, Petrov did not sleep. Valentina heard him walking through the house, moving things, rearranging them. In the morning, she discovered that the little leather suitcase had disappeared, and some papers were burning in the stove. Petrov was destroying the traces, preparing for the worst. At the military commissariat, they kept him for 4 hours. Valentina waited at home, not knowing what to do. What if he doesn't come back? What if they arrest him right there? But Petrov returned. Pale, sweaty, but apparently calm. "Everything is fine," he said. "A routine check. They have no proof. Just suspicions." But in his eyes, Valentina saw fear. An animalistic primal fear. Of a cornered predator. The following weeks were hell. Petrov barely slept, had lost weight, had aged. A few times Valentina noticed unknown people near the house. The surveillance had intensified. The noose was tightening slowly, but inevitably. And then Petrov made a decision. On February 23rd, Soviet Army Day, he proposed to Valentina that they go to Mihail's grave. "You wanted to know where he is buried. I will show you. We'll bring soil from home. We'll commemorate him properly." Valentina understood it was a trap. But she also understood that a refusal would mean immediate execution. She agreed, but set one condition. The children stay at home. Petrov nodded. Of course, it's business for adults. Historians who have analyzed such cases note a typical pattern of behavior for exposed agents. Cornered, they often try to destroy the main witnesses, presenting it as an accident or a disappearance. In the forest, far from witnesses, it was easiest to do. Before leaving, Valentina managed to pass a note to her neighbor for Lieutenant Voronov. Just a few words. "We are going to the forest past Kustrin. If I don't return by evening, look for me there." She attached that photograph from Berlin to the note. The first proof of Petrov's lie. If something happened to her, at least this would remain. The neighbor, a good woman, didn't ask anything, just hugged Valentina tightly and whispered, "Take care of yourself, dear." They went in an old factory truck, which Petrov had borrowed under the pretext of transporting wood. The journey took 3 hours. They were silent this whole time. Only one time Petrov said, "You know, Valentina, I loved you in my own way, and I loved the children. If it hadn't been for the war, maybe everything would have been different." Valentina did not answer. What can you say to a man who is taking you to your death? The forest greeted them with silence. The February snow lay like an untouched carpet. Only rabbit and fox tracks crossed the road. Petrov led her confidently deep inside, obviously knowing the way. After half an hour they reached an old bunker, a German fortification from the war. The walls were covered with moss, the roof had collapsed, but the place was recognizable. Something terrible had happened here 9 years ago. Petrov stopped near a group of birch trees. "Here. Mihail is here." He took a pistol out of his pocket, the same one Valentina had seen that night. "Forgive me, Valentina. You know too much, and I want to live too much." He raised the weapon, and at that moment one shot was heard, but not Petrov's. From somewhere to the side, from behind the trees, Petrov screamed, grabbed his shoulder. The pistol fell from his hand. Men in uniform came out of the woods. In front, Lieutenant Voronov. "We arrived just in time, Valentina Ivanovna. We barely found you in this wilderness. The photograph you sent helped convince the leadership to act immediately. The arrest happened quickly. Petrov did not resist. When they put the handcuffs on him, he looked at Valentina and said, "Now you know where your husband is. It's all I can give you." And he added more quietly, "In the bunker, under the east wall, there's something else. Documents. All the documents. And about others. Let them know the truth." Spring of the year, 1954. The militia station in Serpukhov had turned into an anthill. After Petrov's arrest, what investigators later called the domino effect began. Every thread led to new names, new secrets, new tragedies. Valentina was sitting in the investigator's office. Major Kruglov, a portly man with tired eyes, who seemed to have seen too much human villainy in his life to be surprised by anything anymore. But even he was shocked by the scale of the picture revealed. The documents found in the bunker, under the east wall, turned out to be a time bomb. Petrov, or Ignatiev, or whatever his name actually was, kept detailed records, names, meeting addresses, passwords, the schematic of the agent network that continued to operate after the war. 32 people throughout the country, former policemen, executioners, Abwehr agents, who had managed to legalize themselves under false names. Some held important positions, one even worked in the regional party committee. Major Kruglov showed Valentina photographs. "Do you recognize anyone? Maybe they came to your husband?" She looked carefully at the faces. Some seemed familiar. That man with shifty eyes, hadn't he come in the autumn of '52? And this one, with a characteristic scar on his chin, he was definitely there. He had brought Petrov a package, but the most frightening discovery was yet to come. Among the documents were found the interrogation protocols of Soviet prisoners of war, conducted at the German spy school. Petrov didn't just study there, he taught. He taught future traitors how to properly infiltrate Soviet structures, how to forge documents, how to behave in interrogations. His specialty was the cover legend, creating a believable biography for an agent. Contemporaries remembered how the arrests took place, quietly, without noise. People would disappear at night, and in the morning the neighbors would find out. It turns out that Uncle Vasya, such a good neighbor, who helped everyone in the courtyard, had served in a punitive detachment during the war. And Aunt Maria, the shopkeeper at the grocery store, had been a radio operator for the Germans. The world was turning upside down. People were afraid of each other. Who else is hiding their past? Who else is wearing a mask? Valentina was called in for interrogations almost every day. She told everything she remembered, every detail, every strange word, every one of Petrov's nightmares. The investigators noted, compared, verified. Sometimes, Major Kruglov would shake his head. "How did you live with him for so many years? How did you bear it?" Valentina did not know the answer. Maybe the maternal instinct to protect the children at all costs. Maybe simply fear. Or maybe the hope of finding out the truth about Mihail. Alexei and Nina were temporarily sent to relatives in Tula. Valentina did not want the children to see their home being turned into material evidence. The investigators turned everything upside down, lifted the floorboards, dismantled the stove, searched every crack. They found one more hiding place in the basement, behind a brick wall. Trophies were kept there. German decorations that Petrov had received for special merits to the Reich. The Iron Cross Second Class, the badge for fighting partisans, and a photograph. Petrov was shaking hands with a high-ranking SS official. In April 1954, Valentina was invited to a confrontation with Petrov. She hadn't seen him for 2 months. In this time, he had transformed into an old man. His hair had turned completely gray, shadows deepened under his eyes, his hands trembled. But his gaze remained the same, sharp, attentive, dangerous. The investigator asked questions. Petrov answered monotonously, without emotion. Yes, he had been an Abwehr agent. Yes, he had undergone training at the spy school. Yes, he had killed Obukov Mikhail Stepanovich. But when it came to the motive for the crime, he suddenly became animated. "You don't understand. Mikhail wasn't just a threat to me, he was a threat to the entire network. If he had reported his discovery to the command, dozens of our people would have died." The investigator clarified. "Our people, meaning whose?" Petrov smirked. "And what difference does it make now? We are all former now. And then Valentina couldn't take it anymore. She stood up, approached him. Where is the gold? That German gold for which you killed my husband? Petrov looked at her for a long time. The gold? It was all about the gold? You think I did it for money? No, Valentina. I buried the gold back in 45 in the same forest, 1 kilometer from Mihail's grave, under a triangular stone near the stream. But I never went back for it. Do you know why? He leaned closer, and Valentina smelled the prison stench, a mixture of carbolic acid and despair. Because when I saw you with little Alexei, something broke inside me. I thought maybe if I become a good husband, a good father, that will redeem me. Fool. Blood isn't washed away with family happiness. The summer of the year 1954 was particularly hot, suffocating, heavy. The trial of Petrov and his accomplices was supposed to start in August, but in July something happened that changed everything. One man in civilian clothes came to Valentina. He introduced himself. State Security Colonel Martinov. Wiry, well-built, with piercing gray eyes. The conversation was short, but its content shocked Valentina to the core. It seemed the Petrov-Ignatieff file was much more complicated than it appeared. Among the documents in the bunker, one list of Soviet spies was found who had been infiltrated into German structures under the guise of traitors. The cover legends for these men had been personally created by Petrov, back when he was at the spy school. The paradox was that, while working for the Germans, he was simultaneously helping Soviet agents, perhaps without even suspecting it. Do you understand, Valentina Ivanovna? The colonel was saying. Your husband, Mikhail Stepanovich, stumbled upon a very complex operation. Petrov was indeed a German agent. But some people in his network were working for us. A double game, and sometimes even a triple one. Mihail could not have known all the details. He acted as a patriot, but by exposing him, he could have lost our people behind German lines. Valentina listened, and the world turned upside down again. Had Mihail died because of one monstrous mistake? Because not everyone knew the full picture? The colonel, as if reading her thoughts, shook his head. No, don't think like that. Petrov didn't kill your husband to protect Soviet spies. He was protecting himself. It just so happened that his exposure would have dragged the innocent down with him. War is always dirty, Valentina Ivanovna, even when heroes are fighting. In those days, Valentina often went to Mikhail's grave. Yes, now it was a real grave. The remains had been exhumed, the expertise was done, the identity was confirmed. Mikhail Stepanovich Obukov was reburied in the Serpukhov cemetery with military honors, posthumously decorated with the Order of the Red Star. The whole town came to the funeral. Alexei, already a teenager, stood by the grave of his father, whom he barely remembered, and cried. Nina clung to her mother, not understanding why everyone was crying for a man who had died so long ago. But the most terrible revelation awaited Valentina at the end of July. Colonel Martinov came to her again, this time with a file of documents. We checked all the data and discovered something interesting. Petrov was telling the truth about the gold. We found the hiding place. 3 million rubles in gold bars and valuables. But it is not German gold. It is the gold reserve from one of our evacuation convoys, which disappeared in the year 1941. The Germans captured it, and Petrov later appropriated it. But here is what's strange. He really didn't touch the treasure for 9 years. Why? Valentina knew the answer, or thought she knew it. Petrov had tried to become another man, had tried to bury his past along with the gold. But the past cannot be buried. It always finds a way to return. August 1954. The courtroom. Valentina sat in the first row, clutching Mikhail's photograph in her hands. Not the one from Berlin, but another, from before the war, where they were together, young and happy. Petrov was brought in, under guard. He searched for her with his gaze through the room, found her, nodded. 2 days before the trial, he had sent her one short letter through his lawyer, just a few lines. Valentina, I know you will not forgive me, nor should you. But let me tell you what I couldn't say then, in the forest. Mihail died like a hero. He did not beg for mercy. He did not pray for his life. His last words were, "Tell Valentina and my son that I love them." I promised to pass it on. I am fulfilling my promise. The trial lasted 3 days. Witnesses, documents, material evidence. Among the material evidence was that photograph from Berlin, from May 1945. Experts confirmed the authenticity of the image and Mihail's handwriting on the back. The prosecutor showed it to the room. Here is the proof that Obukov was alive in May, although the defendant claimed to have buried him in April. This photograph is the first thread that led to the exposure of an entire spy network. Petrov pleaded guilty to all charges, did not justify himself, did not ask for leniency. Only one time, when the prosecutor asked him if he repented, Petrov answered, "Repentance is a luxury I cannot afford. I made one choice and lived with it for 9 years. Every day I saw the eyes of the woman whose husband I killed. I watched the son of the man whose life I took grow up. That was my punishment, and what comes next no longer matters." The sentence was as expected. Execution by firing squad. Petrov listened to it standing, without blinking. As he was being led out of the room, he turned to Valentina. "Take care of the children, especially Nina. She is not guilty of anything." Valentina nodded. What else could she do? The final revelations came unexpectedly. One day before the execution of the sentence, the shooting was scheduled for August 27th. That investigator, Major Kruglov, came to Valentina. He brought one sealed envelope with him. In the car, on the way to the prison, where the last meeting was to take place, he told her what changed the entire understanding of this story. Petrov, or as it turned out, his real name was Nikolai Vasilyevich Arkhipov, did not fall into captivity by chance. His own people turned him in. The battalion commander, who envied the capable young officer, wrote one denunciation that Arkhipov was expressing defeatist sentiments. In 42, that meant a disciplinary battalion or execution. Arkhipov was sent on a suicidal attack, where he fell prisoner, wounded, bruised, barely alive. In the German prisoner of war camp, he lasted 3 months. Hunger, beatings, humiliation. And then recruiters from the Abwehr came, looking for educated officers, knowledgeable in foreign languages. Arkhipov knew German. Before the war, he had studied at the Institute of Foreign Languages. He was offered the choice, slow death in the camp or collaboration. He chose life. Who among us can say with certainty that they would have done otherwise? Who can cast the stone at him without having gone through the hell of captivity? But here is what is most amazing. According to the documents found after the arrest of the entire network, it turned out that Arkhipov Petrov tried to minimize the harm. Yes, he trained agents. Yes, he created legends. But out of the 32 people he trained, 28 were exposed almost immediately after infiltration. Their legends contained micro-errors, invisible to the Germans, but obvious to Soviet counterintelligence. A coincidence or conscious sabotage by a man who, even in betrayal, was trying to remain human. In the death row cell, Petrov sat quietly. When Valentina entered, he stood up, nodded. He looked strangely at peace, as if he had finally been relieved of a heavy burden. The guard retreated towards the door, giving them the illusion of privacy. 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes for the last conversation. Petrov spoke first, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. "I have thought a lot these months about what it would have been like if I had told the truth immediately. If I had come to you and said, 'I am the one who killed your husband, but I am also the one who can tell you about his last moments, about his courage, about his words.' Would you have accepted me then? Would you have listened to me?" Valentina was silent. "What to say?" Petrov continued, and notes appeared in his voice that she had never heard before. The sincerity of a dying man who has nothing left to hide. "Do you know what Mihail said before he died? After I shot? He smiled, can you imagine? He smiled and said, 'You lost, traitor, because the truth will come out anyway, and my Valentina will find out who you are.' He was dying and thinking of you, of the truth. Not of revenge, not of curses, of the truth." Tears streamed down Valentina's face, but she didn't wipe them away. "Let him see. Let him know." Petrov took a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. The guard checked it, allowed him to pass it. "These are the coordinates, the exact coordinates of all the places. Where the gold is, the real gold, not the one they found, there are 3 more hiding places. Where documents are, complete lists of agents, including those who haven't been caught yet. And where... He fell silent, then exhaled. Where I buried 3 more. Your cousin, Simeon, is not the only one who knew the truth and died of a heart attack. Their families have the right to know. Contemporaries who studied the phenomenon of betrayal during the war years note a paradoxical detail. Many traitors, at the end of their lives, felt the need for a confession, not a justification. They understood that justification does not exist, but precisely a confession, the transmission of the truth to those they cause pain, as if the truth could at least slightly lighten the weight of their crimes. Time was running out. The guard coughed, the signal that they must finish. Valentina stood up, and then Petrov asked abruptly, "Nina. She is my daughter, the only clean thing I created in this life. Don't tell her the truth while she's little. Let her believe her father died a hero on the front, on any front. When she grows up, when she can understand, then you will decide. But give her a chance at a normal life, without the stigma of a traitor's daughter." Valentina nodded. What else could she do? Nina truly was not guilty of anything. Children do not answer for the sins of their parents. Or they do. In that country, at that time, they did. But Valentina decided she would protect the little girl from the truth, from people's malice, from the curse of blood. Petrov's last words were unexpected. "I don't ask for forgiveness. I have no right. But I want you to know, those 8 years with you and the children were the only time I felt human. Even if it was a lie. Even if it was built on blood. But thank you for giving me those 8 years. For allowing me to know what it's like to have a family. Even if someone else's, even if stolen, but a family." August 27th, 4 o'clock in the morning. Valentina was not sleeping. She knew that at that moment everything was ending. Somewhere in the courtyard of the Serpukhov prison, 1 shot rang out, or more. Along with Petrov, 3 more from his network were shot that day. She stood at the window, looked at the sparse stars, and thought about the strangeness of human destiny, about how war mutilated souls, about how love and hate can live in a single heart, about the fact that the truth is sometimes more frightening than any lie. 3 years passed. The year 1957 brought unexpected news. 1 letter came from Moscow. It seemed the Petrov-Arkhipov file was being re-examined. No, he was not acquitted. Murder is murder. Betrayal is betrayal. But new circumstances had come to light. Those micro-errors in the agent's legends, they had indeed been conscious. They found his journal, hidden in the wall of the spy school. He wrote, "I do what I can. I save whom I can. Let them think I'm a weak teacher, just so there is less blood." 1 more discovery. Mikhail Obukov, in his last report, never sent, wrote, "Ignatiev is a complex figure. Possibly, he is not so much a traitor as a victim of circumstances, but this does not nullify his crimes. I request that all circumstances be taken into account when examining the case." Mikhail, even while exposing a traitor, tried to be fair, tried to see the man behind the enemy's mask. Alexei grew up, became an engineer, left for Moscow, got married, had his own children. Sometimes he would come to Serpukhov, to the grave of his father, his real father. Valentina told him the truth when he turned 18. He listened in silence, then asked, "But did you love Petrov?" What could she answer? Had she loved the man who killed her husband? Or had she loved the mask he wore? Or had she simply gotten used to it, adapted, survived? "I don't know," she answered then. "Honestly, I don't know." With Nina, it was harder. She remembered Petrov as a good, caring, loving father. It was hard for Valentina to decide to tell her the truth. She only told her when Nina turned 25, when she herself had become a mother. Nina listened, was silent, then said, "So, my father was a monster." Valentina shook her head. "Your father was a man who committed monstrous deeds. Those are different things." Nina was never able to fully accept this. She left for the Far East, wrote rarely. Maybe it was better this way. To start a new life, without the burden of the past. The gold from the hiding places was handed over to the state. The documents helped expose 12 other people from Petrov's network. The remains of Petrov's 3 victims were found and reburied. Their families finally learned the truth. Bitter, frightening, but the truth. Valentina lived until the year 1983. She lived her last years alone, in the same house in Serpukhov. The neighbors whispered behind her back, "She's the widow of a war hero," or "She's the wife of a traitor." It depended on which version of the story they knew. She corrected neither one nor the other. The truth was too complicated for gossip. Before her death, she wrote one letter. Addressee: nowhere or in eternity. Mihail, my love, I lived a strange life. 9 years I lived with your killer. I bore a child by him. I shared a bed and table with him. I should have hated him every second. But you know what's most terrible? Sometimes I forgot to hate. Sometimes I was almost happy. Forgive me for that. Forgive me for not being able to recognize the beast immediately. Forgive me for allowing him to take your place. But do not forgive him. Let that remain on his conscience, wherever it is now. I fulfilled my promise. I raised our son to be a worthy man. He remembers you. He is proud of you. That is enough. I hope it is enough. Yours forever, Valentina.